Thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership. That's Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here every week on Thursday talking with you about things happening in leadership, corporate leadership in particular. And this week, we're going to continue the discussion about the Great Resignation and, in particular, how it is having an impact on the rise in entrepreneurship. So, Robert.
Yes.
You are one of those. Well, you were an entrepreneur before,
Yes.
but this kind of what's happened in the pandemic and it's had an impact on you and your business. And so you're sort of swept up in that, going from a side hustle to full hustle. Right?
That's what we said. Side hustle to full hustle. Yes. Yeah. This has been really interesting for me because I started my coaching business right after I got certified as a coach, right? So that was 10 years ago. And I had some clients, very few external clients, because I was an internal coach in an organization. So I was like, well, I'm coaching in this organization, but the pandemic had a very, very dire effect on that organization. And that organization went from having over 1,000 people to about 200 people because of the pandemic. And I was one of those folks that they were like, well, you know what? Don't really need a whole lot of coaching right now. So I decided to, and you and I talked, because when I first was looking for work, I was like, well, maybe I should just go back and do my OD stuff and get back into organizational development and training and have coaching as part of that. But you were one of the people that convinced me to just dive into coaching. And so I did that. And I'm glad I did because things are really, I'm doing well. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Well, when you talk to people and there's just something about them that speaks to what their strengths are. Not that you're not good in training and OD and all of that, because you are, but as an executive coach, that's what you've been doing. That's your thing. And why not? So why not give that a full shot? You had been doing it. Why not just build your business from there? And you can add the other components as part of that, which is sort of the path that I took. Now, mine was full-time before the pandemic. And so entrepreneurship actually has been on the rise for some time. And one of the things that happens in down economies is that there is an automatic rise in entrepreneurship, right? Mm-hmm. People are reminded that jobs are not necessarily as secure as we tend to think they are. And we're looking for always looking for some sense of security. And so adding another income stream is often helpful for people. The other thing is, as it relates to what's going on right now, though, is that, and we've talked about this, is this it's dissatisfaction with what's happening in corporate lives. In a lot of instances, there are companies that are doing fine. Their employees are happy. They are working with them to find the right balance for working, hybrid work, working remotely, working in the office. They are doing all the right things, but there are a lot that are not. And, we've got millions of people. It happened in May. It's continued to happen a large chunk again in July, of people who have just simply left the workforce voluntarily. Not the things that happened early on where people were sort of forced out of the work, but voluntarily. And they are choosing not to go back, right? You could have looked for another job. You probably very easily could have gotten another job, but you decided to just jump in both feet.
Well, I was actually offered a job. And the conversation was like, well, you can work a ton of hours for this organization, or you can work a ton of hours for yourself. And for me, that was, a no-brainer. It was like, well, always wanted to build my own. I've had other businesses, and I was like, well, if I'm going to put in a ton of hours, I might as well be the one that, go to bed tired, knowing that I'm building something for myself. And that's what I was thinking.
And it's at least give it a shot, right? And because if it doesn't work, you can always go back, but we never know unless we try.
Right.
And so, what were some of the, or maybe with your clients, because I would imagine your clients are going through some of these same, weighing their values and their priorities about whether or not to continue in something or move on. What are some of the considerations that they are taking into account when they're making decisions one way or the other?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of my clients aren't really talking about leaving, although it's, it's not far behind. But a lot of them are, they start talking about the culture of the organization and whether or not it's where they want to be. And I think that's because a lot of organizations, now that we're back in, we're moving back to, toward normal, a lot of organizations are trying to ramp up a lot quicker with a lot less. Quickly, I should say, with a lot less. And I think that is putting a lot of strain on some of the people that are working for those organizations. And so many of the people that I coach are, they haven't said they want to leave, but they are struggling with getting used to or getting back up to speed and taking on more responsibilities now that things are starting to return to normal.
And that's a recurring theme, which is that there is more work, right? And with that is coming a higher level of dissatisfaction as people are weighing, right, what work means to them now, as opposed to what work meant to them 2 years ago. And it makes sense, right? They said this. I gave a speech the other day, and I said that there is this. We've had the opportunity to do it a different way, and people say, I like sort of been unleashed, right? This newfound freedom to do work in a way that works for me rather than a way that's been prescribed for me, right? And I can get more done. Why not reward that? And so for those who are a step or two ahead of your clients who are saying, and I've got some clients that I've been talking to about this, I don't want that life anymore. I want a different life, and I want not a freedom to do anything I want, but to work in a way that makes sense for my life. And commuting an hour plus 2 hours a day doesn't make sense anymore, because I know I can do the work without having that.
Right. And for a lot of people, it's a question of, values. What value, right? So if they value family, but they have to work a whole bunch of hours in the office, and when they get home, they're too tired to spend any time with their family, they start to really look at, okay, I may be making more money on this hand over here, but on the other hand, I'm not spending time doing what's really important for me. Perhaps if I do something on my own, I may be making less money, but I won't have to, commute. I won't have to spend money on that, quote unquote car fare. I can spend more time with my family. I can have more balance in life. And I think that's a consideration for a lot of people.
So I want to share some statistics about sort of what's happening on the entrepreneur side. So, and we haven't talked about this much, but this is another factor in the rise of entrepreneurship is women in particular, right? So women have left the workforce in greater numbers than men because women tend to be the caregivers, the care providers in the home. And so as they have had to find a balance of taking care of kids that were no longer in school and doing the homeschooling. Not that men weren't, so don't be offended. And I actually had a client who was the primary caregiver of the children, who's an entrepreneur, and his wife worked. He's an entrepreneur. He had more flexibility and therefore took that on. So not saying it doesn't happen, but in overwhelming numbers, it's the women. It's women who have taken on the brunt of that. And so they've left the workforce, but the work, their need to work, their desire to work hasn't waned, right? So they just look at a different way to do that. And I think this feeds into something we've talked about, which is the gig economy. And this is just going to help that continue to grow. So I wanted to share a few statistics that I found, on this subject, and looking to find my notes here. Sorry. Here we go. So, there has been a like 24% increase in the number of businesses that were started year over year. So in 2020, and then that number is continuing to increase. So from 2019 to 2020, 24% increase in the number of new businesses started, and 2021 is continuing to see the pace of these businesses rising. So a couple of things are happening. Some people haven't, and I spoke about this the other day, some people haven't quite left yet, right? They're having this consideration of leaving, but they're starting businesses with the thought that if they're not going to get what they want in their jobs, that they will then have these businesses. So they may be starting as side hustles. Some, they're just getting to a place where they can actually leave their jobs. And so with those kinds of numbers, right? And the last time that happened was in the Great Recession, and like 2008, the numbers went up. The entrepreneurial numbers went up after 9/11, after the Great Depression. So, and other economic, it is just one of those things where people look at the opportunities, right? Or they're creating opportunities sort of out of necessity. And while we could see the Great Resignation as a voluntary thing, I think a lot of people see it as actually necessary to stay in alignment with the values, as you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it was one of the considerations for, listen, I made this decision long before the quote unquote Great Resignation. So, but for me, it was, and I had been considering and toying with the idea of going on my own for a while, and the pandemic just was like, yep, you're going to go do it. So for me, it was like, okay, well, now is the opportunity. The universe is saying, you go do this thing. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to, give this my all. And I have the skills, and we've talked about this for a while and want to get out there and start doing it. But for a lot of other people, I think it was, like you said, they got a taste of that balance when they were working remotely and working for someone else remotely. And you're like, well, I could be doing this for myself, maybe not making nearly as much money, or maybe making as much money, and having that balance. And so why not? Why not do something, for myself? Why not do something that's in line with my passion? Why not do something that's in line with my values? And rather, you can do it now, and maybe you fail, maybe you're wildly successful, But at least if you fail, you can say, I gave it a shot.
Yeah.
I learned something, and I can move forward from there. So it's one of those things. It's for me, it made totally logical sense because it's in line with what I do. It's in line with what I went to school for. So there is no failing, right? For me, it's like, either I continue to do this or I go and I work for somebody else and do it.
And
So,
I think that's a good point. There is no failing, right? Either you win or you learn.
right. Yeah, there's no failing. You're going to come back and you're going to gain something from it. With owning a business, you you get a lot of appreciation for executives and business owners when you own your own business because you're doing everything. You're getting to see, especially when a lot of people I know, they own businesses and they have people working for them. And so they get to see, oh yeah, it's not so easy running an organization. It's not so you get that, you learn stuff, and that can only help you if you decide later on to go back into corporate.
I think that's a really good point. And there is nothing like having an experience and then being able to revisit something that here's a simple example. Like I waited tables, right? I understand. I think that makes me a better guest in a restaurant, right? Having had that experience. And I think you're right. Having had the experience of running your own business, particularly if you have staff, employees, but even if you are interacting with vendors and contractors that are part of your team and
Sure.
helping you, even that will help you because you're making decisions and understanding all the things that go into helping leaders make decisions is really important.
Absolutely. And being able to learn, that's something that you and I talk about all the time. Being able to learn from mistakes, being able to learn from things that don't necessarily go the way you thought they were going to go. That is a huge thing. Once you get over the, oh my goodness, I really messed up, being able to pivot and be like, what did I learn from that so that I can, be closer to success? Or even if it's just to minimize the pain that you experience, that's a learning experience that a lot of people don't get the opportunity to take advantage of.
Absolutely. And so I was talking about like this increase in numbers of 24% the last year, and it's continuing to grow. This year, I think they said that the first quarter of this year was like 1.3 million new companies that were started just the first quarter of this year alone. And of course, not all of those are going to succeed, and that's okay. There is a high rate of businesses that go out, businesses, startups that go out of business in the first year. There are numbers of factors that are a part of that. And it's okay because I think that goes back to your point about learning and how that can make them stronger employees when they go back into the workforce if they don't try a different business, right? Which is something else that happens. People will try one thing. If that doesn't work, they'll try something else.
Yeah, and you're always learning. I mean, some of the businesses that I, owned and were a part of had nothing to do with coaching. Because I've had other careers, and I always can draw from those and use that knowledge. And I've used it even when I was working for other organizations, because you're going to be working with people. If you have a business partner, sometimes you have to deal with conflict. Sometimes you have to deal with scheduling issues. You have to deal with vendors. If you're going out there and you're trying to get business for your organization, you have to go out there and deal with those folks too. All of that goes into your knowledge base and your pool of things that you can draw from when you're working in a corporation or when you own your own business. So those things are really important. For example, selling something, right? So if you have a product or a service you're selling and you have to go out there and get clients, or you're not going to make any money, you start doing that, you can certainly use all those skills when you're in a corporate and you're selling an idea to, other people in other departments or executives. And that was something that I did when I would, write up all these plans for new training programs or leadership programs and have to sell those to the C-suite. I'd have to stand up there and say, this is how it's going to benefit the organization. This is how it's going to benefit you. This is how it's going to benefit the individual departments and the employees. So all of those things came in handy.
Absolutely. So some of the other things, and we've talked about some of these factors that have gone into, why this rise in entrepreneurship. Initially, a lot of it had to do with people who were just laid off. They were furloughed, laid off, and they had to find a way to make money. And then as that has shifted less from sort of the forced out of the workforce into sort of the voluntary side, this great resignation or great reflection, as others have called it, or rather I am calling it, there is the going back into the office and just saying, I'm not interested in doing that. What's interesting is that a lot of these people are then offering their services back to their companies, right? So they are becoming contractors in some instances, providing these services that they were doing as employees, but staying in control of how they do it so that they can maintain the freedom, so to speak, that they had gained as a part of this. The other thing driving it, besides being called back into the office, is that as the workforce has been reduced, they have more on their plates, right? Salaries are not always increasing with the taking on additional work. And something that's happening more and more frequently is burnout. And people are just like, I can't take it anymore. I can't do this anymore. The job dissatisfaction is going up, and this desire to have more control and better balance in their lives is just top of mind.
Yeah. I mean, that balance part is so big, and burnout. We could do a whole show on burnout. I mean, that's one of the things that a lot of people talk about now, going back to working full time in the office and being so exhausted. Well, you just had, you were out for, 18 months or 12 months or whatever, working from your home. And it was a lot easier. You could just, when you're finished work, you just walk upstairs, take a nap, right? And now you have to deal with commuting. And we forget how taxing commuting can be. Working from home, like I do, I have my home office here. I am so grateful that I don't have to go and deal with all the New York City commuters like I used to. And I used to enjoy that time thinking about it. When I was doing it, I would read, I would research, I would use that time, but then you have to get up and go someplace else. And so I didn't realize how much energy that took from me until I no longer had to do it. And so it's one of those things.
I remember the first time I made a trip downtown so I left my last job, I don't know, three years plus ago. And I made a trip downtown for something. I think I was going for fun. I was meeting someone for coffee or lunch or something. But as I was going, I was in traffic, and I remember like getting all tense. I was like, I don't miss this at all. It was like, I just don't miss it. And so I think you're right. It's one of those things that we don't think about, I think, a lot in the moment, but it's cumulative, right? And particularly if it causes a conflict with your values and it's costing you something on the other end, not just time, but time with people or time doing something else. And now that you sort of have recouped that and can use that, like I said, hour for some people, depending on where you live, that it could be much more than that. An hour a day. For me, it was about an hour, 10 minutes a day total, both morning and evening. But there were days when it took an hour or more to get home. And I thought, I used to run half marathons. I actually lived like a half marathon away from my job. I was like, I could just run home faster.
Yeah, it's taxing. I mean, that's just one aspect of it. I remember when I first moved back to New York many years ago, and this is when I had just graduated from school and I was doing the session musician stuff, and I moved back to New York, and I was like, I'm going to take a part-time job, because as a session musician, doing the little gigs that I was doing, I didn't have any insurance at the time, and I was, I'm going to take a part-time job. And I remember that first week, I took a part-time job, and we worked like 4 hours a day, 5 hours or something like that. And I remember I was so exhausted. After that first week, on the train ride home, I fell asleep. And some lady, and it was at the last stop, and some lady got off the train, saw that I didn't stir, went back and said, "Wake up, you're going to end up in the Bronx someplace." And that's how hard I was sleeping. It took a lot out of me. And so I think a lot of folks that have been used to, working from home, now they're starting to feel the effect of traveling to work, working, in an office. And if their office, if they're in a job where they have to travel after they get to the office, they're traveling in that capacity too, going back to the office and then traveling back home. Those folks are feeling really exhausted. You're still muted.
I was talking to someone who is an entrepreneur and does training and traveled a lot for training, right? To work for training. And with the pandemic, of course, everything went virtual. And even people who are entrepreneurs are feeling that, being in airports, being on planes. They have reduced the number of flights a lot of times. So there are more people on fewer flights, longer delays. There are all kinds of things going on. So we've talked about sort of what's creating this, and the point of our show is on the leadership side, really. So what are some of the things that leaders can do to maybe stem the tide of this? And I don't think it'll be anything new, but it'll be here in this episode, right? So what are some of the things that leaders can do that will help them to maybe reduce the number of people who are looking to leave for whatever reason, and in particular, going for greener pastures as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think the first thing to do is listen. I mean, that's always on, mine and yours, top of the list is listen and find out what those. I think we addressed some of this last week, and I think it does merit repeating. So you listen to what their issues are, and you address those specific issues. Particularly when people start talking about being burnt out, if you're, as a leader, if you are empathetic to that goes a long way. People want to feel like they're being heard, particularly when they feel like their bodies are betraying them or they're mentally exhausted. That's one of the major things. A lot of what I hear is that people already are starting to feel burnt out and exhausted. So work with your employees and try to figure out what you can do to help them get through that. And there are some ways I think that they could do it. I don't want to give too many suggestions, because when that happens, people think that that's the magic bullet.
Right.
And oh, you should do this. Well, this guy in something I saw on LinkedIn Live said we should do this. How come it's not working? But you have to experiment and see what's going to work for your particular group of people. Yeah. And I think when you include them in some of those discussions, you're going to come up with a lot better answers than something that I can shoot out right now off the top of my head.
Right.
But
And it's actually not that. I think the most important thing is what you said is listening, right? Your employees will actually tell you what they need.
yeah,
And what we will say is that that information, that's feedback, that's important, and it should not be discounted because it's uncomfortable to hear,
right,
right? And that's part of change management. That's part of all that is that, and which is the only thing that's happening right now, right?
right.
Is this all of this is change management? First of all, change
Absolutely.
is constantly happening, but this is a global change. This is a something that is really requiring sort of a systemic approach to you managing it, but it's just feedback. And
Nope. I think you froze a little bit. It looks like you froze. So Whitney, maybe you should exit and enter back. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, you're back. So you froze for a good 40 seconds there.
a little,
Yep.
a little bit of internet issues going on here, but
Okay.
no worries. So I'm just saying that this is change, right? This is change management happening in real time. It's not a change that you sought to put in place, but it is.
Oh, it's happening again. So I think what you're saying is that this is change management, and you should get conversant in how people react to change. And one of the things that you and I talk about a lot is William Bridges change in transitions model. And I like that one. There are tons of them out there, but I think leaders should get familiar with one or two of those and look at how they can help their organization. So I'm hoping that you come back soon. And for